The discovery of thermobaric vacuum bomb has raised fears that the already volatile situation in the Middle East could be pushed to the brink of war. With tensions already high, adding this weapon to the mix could be the spark that sets off a chain of devastating events. Many countries are worried about the potential impact of this powerful weapon and are scrambling to respond. How will this new weapon change the balance of power in the world? What will it mean for the future of peace and security? This is a story you need to hear. But before we dive deep into the details of this weapon, let's rewind to how it got to this point. You may not know this, but the ongoing tension between started in the early 20th century. Yes, that's right. In 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, promising to establish a national home for the Jewish people in which was then under Ottoman rule. This pledge resonated with the Zionist movement, advocating for a Jewish homeland in Jerusalem known as Zion. After World War I, Palestine transitioned from Ottoman control to British rule under a League of Nations mandate. This move was criticized for neglecting the aspirations of the population who sought independence. The commitment by Britain, coupled with the Holocaust during World War II, prompted tens of thousands of Jewish civilians to migrate to during the 1920s and 1930s. In February 1947, the British proposed that the United Nations take over the handling of due to ongoing tensions. The United Nations eventually passed a resolution to partition into two independent states, a Jewish state and an Arab state, with Jerusalem under UN supervision. However, Arabs opposed this decision, particularly concerning Jerusalem's status, a city of immense religious importance to various groups. Despite objections, declared independence on May 15, 1948, leading to the Arab War as 5 Arab states opposed creation. This conflict resulted in the displacement of marking the beginning of a long battle over land ownership. Supported by foreign powers, emerged victorious, leading to the division of territory into the West Bank and the Egypt and Jordan administered the and the West Bank, respectively, until 1967. Is a small coastal area surrounded by housing around 2 million people. The West Bank, a landlocked region bordered by Israel and Jordan, is home to approximately 3 million people. A 6-day war occurred on June 5, 1967, following a prolonged conflict. This conflict resulted in Israel engaging in a 6-day military operation against its Arab neighbors. During this war, captured several territories, including the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. As a consequence, a significant number of became refugees, and it marked the beginning of a long. The first major Palestinian uprising for self-determination started in 1987 and continued until 1993, when the Oslo Accords were signed. These accords recognized the PLO as a representative of the Palestinian people and acknowledged Israel's right to exist in peace. A second intifada occurred in 2000, lasting until 2005, leading to Palestinian autonomous control of the West Bank and Gaza. In 2005, Israel disengaged from the Gaza Strip. Subsequently, Hamas won an election and took control of Gaza in 2006, leading to a blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt in 2007, significantly restricting the movement of people and goods. These restrictions have been a cause for concern among humanitarian groups due to the living conditions of Palestinians in the region. According to the European Commission and the United Nations, poverty, food insecurity, high unemployment rates, and limited access to necessities are significant challenges for the population in Gaza. Fast forward to today, and the tension between Hamas and Israel has only gotten worse. Following the terrorist organization Hamas' latest assault, Israeli authorities reported that at least 1,400 people had perished and 4,629 more had been injured in Israel. Hamas fired thousands of rockets in the direction of Israel, and perhaps 1,000 fighters entered the nation through the Gaza Strip. At least 130 soldiers and civilians have reportedly been taken captive, according to Israeli sources. In response, the Israeli military declared a state of alert for war and attacked Gaza with hundreds of airstrikes in retaliation. According to Palestinian authorities, the Israeli response has resulted in at least 5,791 deaths and 16,297 injuries in Gaza. Following this onslaught, Israeli defense officials have announced that all food and power supplies were being cut off to Gaza in anticipation of a total siege. Rekindled global protests have been sparked by the attacks, drawing attention to the ongoing strife in the region. It is on this note that Israel has decided to embark on a secret journey to develop a thermobaric vacuum bomb to put an end to this tension once and for all. Now, wait to hear what this bomb can do, and then you will know why it has left China, Russia, and Hamas panicking. Traditional explosives typically include a mixture of fuel and oxidizer, whereas thermobaric weapons solely rely on fuel, resulting in significantly higher energy output for the same weight. These weapons, due to their dependence on atmospheric oxygen, are unsuitable for underwater, high-altitude and adverse weather use, but excel in enclosed spaces like tunnels, buildings, and non-hermetically sealed field fortifications. When a thermobaric weapon strikes its target, the initial explosive charge detonates, opening the container and releasing the fuel mixture as a cloud. Notably, the blast wave from a thermobaric weapon persists longer than that of conventional explosives. In contrast to conventional explosives that generate a blast front from a single source using oxidation in a confined area, a thermobaric weapon creates a flame front that expands into a larger volume. This leads to pressure fronts within the fuel-oxidant mixture and the surrounding air. The principles governing thermobaric explosives are akin to those behind accidental unconfined vapor cloud explosions, which have historically occurred in flour mills, coal mines, and more recently in incidents like the Buncefield fire in the UK in 2005, where the blast wave was felt up to 150 kilometers away. A typical thermobaric weapon comprises a container filled with a fuel substance featuring a small conventional explosive scatter charge at its core. The choice of fuels varies based on their exothermic properties, from powdered metals like aluminum or magnesium to organic materials, potentially with a self-contained partial oxidant. Recent advancements include the utilization of nanofuels. The effectiveness of a thermobaric bomb depends on several critical factors. These factors include the efficient dispersal of the fuel, the rapid mixing of fuel with the surrounding atmosphere, the ignition process, and the positioning of the igniter relative to the fuel container. Some thermobaric bomb designs incorporate robust munitions cases that contain the blast pressure for a sufficient duration, allowing the fuel to reach temperatures well above its auto-ignition point. When the container ruptures, the superheated fuel auto-ignition progressively upon contact with atmospheric oxygen, adhering to conventional upper and lower flammability limits. Close-range detonation of the dispersal charge, which compresses and heats the surrounding atmosphere, can influence the lower flammability limit. In contrast, the upper limit can affect the ignition of aerosols above pools of oil. Innovative designs preheat the fuel above its ignition temperature, ensuring minimal ignition delay during dispersion, thus eliminating this weakness. The sustained combustion of the fuel molecule's outer layer as they come into contact with air generates additional heat, maintaining the fireball's interior temperature and sustaining the detonation. Within a confined space, a series of reflective shock waves are generated, extending the fireball's duration as exothermic recombination reactions occur. Subsequent damage can result from the cooling gases and sharp pressure drop. sometimes leading to a partial vacuum, inaccurately referred to as a vacuum bomb. This environment can also lead to piston-type afterburning as flame fronts accelerate. The thermobaric bomb employs a fuel-air explosive, FAE. An FAE device comprises a fuel container and two separate explosive charges. Once deployed, the first explosive charge ruptures the container at a predetermined height, dispersing the fuel into a cloud that mixes with atmospheric oxygen. The size of the cloud varies with the munition's size, and it can flow around objects and into structures. The second charge then detonates the cloud, creating a massive blast wave capable of destroying reinforced buildings and equipment and causing harm to individuals. The impact of the blast wave is particularly severe in enclosed spaces such as foxholes, bunkers, tunnels, and caves. Traditional countermeasures like barriers and personnel armor are largely ineffective against thermobaric weapons, as noted in a Human Rights Watch report referencing a study by the US Defense Intelligence Agency. The lethal mechanism of the blast against living targets possesses a distinct and unsettling nature. What proves fatal is not the initial explosion itself, but rather the ensuing pressure wave, and more critically, the subsequent vacuum, which has the gruesome effect of rupturing the victim's lungs. In instances where the fuel deflagrates without detonation, the consequences are equally grim, causing severe burns and inhaling burning fuel. Notably, the commonly used FAE fuels, ethylene oxide and propylene oxide, are highly toxic, making undetonated FAE as deadly to individuals caught within the lethal cloud as conventional chemical agents. A comprehensive study by the US Central Intelligence Agency confirms the devastating impact of an FAE explosion within confined spaces. It says that those close to the ignition point are obliterated, while those on the periphery face a different yet equally dire fate, suffering numerous internal, often invisible injuries. These include ruptured lungs, burst eardrums, crushed inner ear organs, internal organ damage, severe concussions, and possibly leading to blindness. Another document from the Defense Intelligence Agency speculates that FAE victims might not be rendered unconscious by the blast, but instead endure several seconds or even minutes of suffocation. Historical records indicate that early attempts to harness such destructive power date back to the First World War, where incendiary shells, known as brand granite in German, employed a slow yet intensely burning substance, like tar-soaked fabric and gunpowder dust. These shells would continue to burn for approximately 2 minutes after detonation, scattering burning elements in all directions. During World War II, the German Wehrmacht embarked on developing a vacuum bomb, guided by the Austrian physicist Mario Zippermayr. During the Vietnam War, the United States also developed thermobaric weapons, prompting a response from Russia. After witnessing the US's development of fuel-air explosives, FAEs, Soviet scientists swiftly created their own FAE arsenal, which has since evolved into third-generation FAE warheads like the RPO-A used by Russian forces. Russia expanded its thermobaric capabilities over the years, introducing thermobaric ammunition for various weapons. For instance, they designed the TBG-7V thermobaric grenade with a lethal range of 10 meters, 33 feet, launched from an RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenade. The GM-94, a 43 mm pump-action grenade launcher, primarily fires thermobaric grenades for close combat. These grenades, with a 3-meter, 9.8-foot lethality radius, are intentionally designed to minimize fragmentation, ensuring safety up to 4 meters, 13 feet. In September 2007, Russia detonated what they claim to be the most massive thermobaric weapon ever, naming it the father of all bombs in response to the American mother of all bombs. While international law doesn't explicitly ban thermobaric vacuum bombs against military targets, their use on civilians or infrastructure could be prohibited by the United Nations Convention. Certain conventional weapons, CCW, particularly the Protocol on Incendiary Weapons. However, as of November 2022, all efforts to regulate or restrict thermobaric weapons have been unsuccessful, implying that Israel may not face sanctions if it deploys these weapons. What are Russia and China saying about this? Are they going to fold their hands and let that happen? President Joe Biden has consistently expressed his support for Israel, condemning Hamas's brutal attack on October 7th and endorsing a measured response by Israeli forces. In contrast, Presidents Xi Jinping of China and Vladimir Putin of Russia have adopted a different stance. In a somewhat similar response, both leaders have decried attacks on civilians, called for a ceasefire, and offered to mediate, although they have refrained from explicitly condemning Hamas. They share the perspective that the resolution to the conflict lies in establishing an independent Palestinian state. During a recent meeting, China and Russia reaffirmed their mutual position and emphasized their close coordination on Middle East policy. China's Middle East envoy, Zhai Jun, stated during discussions with his Russian counterpart in Qatar that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has reached its current state primarily because the legitimate national rights of the Palestinian people have not been safeguarded. According to Robert Sutter, a professor of international affairs at George Washington University, China and Russia aim to maintain stable relationships, but appear to be shifting their stance away from Israel and toward the Palestinians. Their relationship has grown closer as they face deteriorating ties with the West. China views Russia as a significant partner, particularly in its efforts to promote an alternative world order less dominated by the United States and its democratic allies. This alignment between China and Russia has been reinforced by their strong partnership, which was declared as a no-limits partnership before Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Their recent collaboration was evident when Putin attended a global event in Beijing celebrating the 10th anniversary of Xi's Belt and Road Initiative. While Russia is not formally part of this initiative, Putin's presence was more about demonstrating his influential connections. During his speech at the Belt and Road Forum, Xi did not mention the Israel-Hamas conflict, but his officials have taken a more direct approach. Foreign Minister Wang Yi, for example, told the Saudi Foreign Minister that Israel had exceeded the scope of self-defense and should halt its collective punishment of people in Gaza. China's response to the Hamas raid, in which entire families were killed and an estimated 200 people, including children and the elderly, were taken captive, has left Israel expressing deep disappointment. Gedaliah Afterman, head of the Asia Policy Program at the Abba Eban Institute for International Diplomacy in Israel, said, "From an Israeli perspective, this was Israel's 9/11 or even worse, and the Chinese treated it as if it's just another round." Amir Lati, the Israeli consul general in the Chinese territory of Hong Kong, added, "Any country that wants to play a role in the Middle East needs to have a more balanced approach. We expect countries, especially countries that we see as friendly to Israel, to treat these horrific crimes as terrorism, and we were disappointed with some countries that were more ambiguous about condemnation of these acts." He concluded by stating that calling for a two-state solution is not an option, as it is not an idea that Hamas supports. China and Russia, according to Maslov, have held off on denouncing Hamas because they want to see how Muslim-majority nations, not just the major Middle Eastern oil producers with whom they have close economic ties, but also countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, will react. He declared, "Russia will join the opinion of the majority of Arab leaders," adding that it did not wish to incite Islamic militants inside its borders, especially those in the Dagestan and Chechnya provinces. China has been a long-time supporter of Palestine and recognized the State of Palestine in 1988, despite accusations that it mistreats members of its Uyghur Muslim minority. However, it is also trying to maintain a balanced relationship with Israel, with which it maintains formal diplomatic connections. Before the start of the conflict, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was scheduled to visit China this month. In June, Chinese President Xi hosted Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. Xi has attempted to present China as a possible mediator in both the Middle East, which has historically been dominated by the United States and Ukraine, as he looks to increase his influence globally. Wang Jin, Assistant Director of the Institute of Middle East Studies at Northwest University in China, stated that China's strategy for the region has always been very clear. In an audio message on the WeChat messaging app, Wang Jin stated that China has no intention of seeking proxies in the Middle East, profiting from the Middle East, or trying to fill what's often referred to as a vacuum in the Middle East. This approach is distinct from that of the United States. Beijing achieved an unexpected diplomatic success this year by facilitating talks in which Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations. Additionally, Xi strongly supported the expansion of the BRICS group of emerging economies, set to include 6 new members in the coming year, such as Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Based on the feat China has achieved in the region, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged Beijing to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from spreading to other countries. To be effective, according to US Ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, a true mediator must have a clear stance. At a recent event hosted by the National Committee on US-China Relations, he questioned whether China could provide honest assessments to both parties involved in conflicts. Burns observed that China's approach to diplomacy differs from the practical, real-world diplomacy practiced by the United States, making them seem somewhat distant from global issues. This detachment is evident in Beijing's restrained response to the Gaza conflict, with its state media giving more coverage to the Belt and Road Forum, a crucial diplomatic event for China. David Bandersky, the director of the China Media Project, noted that Chinese state media tends to focus on Beijing's diplomatic influence and global role, but it struggles to address Israel-related issues due to its passive involvement. Meanwhile, the United States' decision to deploy 2 aircraft carriers to the region has significantly altered the geopolitical landscape, which has been well received by Israel and closely monitored by other US allies in the region. It also signals to China that the US maintains a strong presence in the Middle East. Although China may not match the US in military power, there's potential for it to engage in mediation and conflict resolution by leveraging its relationships with various actors in the region. Particularly, China could play a role in humanitarian efforts, such as securing the release of civilian hostages in Gaza. China and Russia, both facing shifting dynamics in the Middle East, are keeping their options open. However, developments like the thermobaric vacuum bomb could prompt them to reconsider their positions. What do you think? Let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.